Hello, and welcome to my series on Federalist Papers in around 10 minutes. If you watched Fed 10, that one went a little bit over, but that one's very long and rambly. This one's pretty concise. So a little background on the Federalist Papers. They were published in a New York magazine. They were intended to convince public opinion towards ratification of the Constitution. They were written before the Constitution was ratified, and they were intended to get people to be pro-Constitution. So these are all about why the Constitution is awesome. Not every author of every Federalist paper is known because they were written by three different men under one pseudonym, Publius. This one, we know it was written by Alexander Hamilton. All right, so Federalist 70. This is in defense of a one-person executive branch. All right, so this is why having one person as president is the way to go. All right, that is what Hamilton is arguing in this paper, and I'm going to try to sum up his argument in 10 minutes or less. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, so basically, people are disliking the idea of a one-person executive, that a vigorous executive is inconsistent with the genius of a Republican government. Why do we need one leader at the helm? That's way too much like a king. We don't like it, okay? He says right here in the first paragraph, he very, very summaciously sums this up. He says that it's essential to the protection of the community against foreign attacks. It is essential to the steady administration of laws, to the protection of property, and to the security of liberty against enterprises and assaults of faction and of anarchy and of ambition. And he says that Rome even did it. All right, that's one of them. Like, hey, it's been done before. How often did the Republic of Rome have to take refuge in the absolute power of a single man? All right, that person historically did go into the role of a dictator, but guess what? They couldn't do it with just the Senate. All right, so if Rome couldn't do it with just the Senate, what's to say that we can do it with just the Senate? We can't. And so we're not going to try to. We are going to set up a strong executive right from the get-go. All right, next, we've already had a feeble executive under the Articles of Confederation, and we know that nothing got done. We want things to actually get done in this government, so we need a strong executive branch. All right? Here he says, here's what we need. We need an energetic executive. We need them to be unified. We need unity in the executive. We need duration in the executive. All right. And we need adequate provision for the support of the executive, someone who's got competent powers. All right. And keep in mind at this point, they had not put the amendment in place that limited the executive to 2 terms. All right, they were not intending for executives to only serve 2 terms. All right, they wanted somebody in the office that knew what they were doing. So term limits were not a thing at this point in time, which is just interesting to take note of. All right, we're going to hop on down to page 3. Make sure you are following along. Here he kind of breaks down why we have a numerous legislature but a one-person executive, because lawmakers are best suited to be the slow, deliberate, long, drawn-out process. Making the laws should be slow and deliberate, but when it comes to the executive, the figurehead of the country, we need one person. We need quick decision. We need action. We need secrecy. We need dispatch, someone who can quickly delegate big jobs to competent people. All right. When it gets to the executive branch, when it gets to that point, you need someone who can work quickly. And what's the quickest, most efficient way to get things done? You have one person making all the decisions. All right. This is how we balance out. We don't want the lawmaking process to be too quick because we want to preserve liberty. But once that process is done, we need things to get done quickly. This is that balance between efficiency and preserving liberty. All right. So, one of the arguments against the one person executive is that why not have a 2-person or a 3-person or even a 12-person executive? Well, he says that the unity is the big important thing in the executive branch. And when the power is split between 2 or more, or between one person and a party of advisors, is that it doesn't work. And he goes on to explain why. In Rome, there were 2 or more counselors, and we see how well that worked out. And in New York and New Jersey, there's 1 authority, and we know by looking at their constitutions that it works much well. All right. So historically, there is no evidence to back up that an executive branch with more than 1 is going to be successful. All right. So Roman history, we've got dissensions between the consuls. All right. We don't need our executive to be arguing all the time. We need them to get things done. All right. He says it gives us no specimens of any peculiar advantage derived to the state from the circumstance of plurality. That is, no historical evidence to back up a successful executive power if it's more than 1. Okay, so he says that when it was more than 1 person as the executive branch in Rome, it was a party of consuls. And guess what happened with the consuls? They didn't get anything done, so it became established custom to divide the administration between themselves by lot, one of them remaining in Rome to govern the city. So they just took turns being the executive. There were lots of them, but 1 person only held the power at one given time. So why did there need to be that many of them? There didn't. All right. They even knew that themselves. Okay. At any given time, there was only 1 person as the executive of Rome. All right. We shall discover much greater cause to reject than to approve the idea of plurality in the executive under any modification whatsoever. Okay. This is another way of saying that multiple executives isn't going to work. All right. Here we go is a section where he says that if there are 2, they're more likely to disagree. All right. It's unity that we are going for in this office. So how can dissension in the executive inspire unity in the populace? It can't. All right, we need a unified executive, and the best way to get that is have it contained in 1 person. Okay, 1 person. Down to page 6. All right, we're going to skip page 6 because he's just talking about the power of the executive branch. All right, page 7 is where the real meat of his argument is. All right, so down here, he says that legislature promptitude of decision is oftener an evil than a benefit. Legislature should be slow. Legislature should be a multitude of people. Legislature should have a plurality, which means there should be lots of people deliberating over decisions. Making laws requires deliberation and dissent. All right? So, but here, when a resolution 2 is once taken, the opposition must be at an end. The resolution is law. We need somebody to say, okay, now it's a law, time for arguments over, time for action, time to get the executive branch together to put the law into place. That's a lot harder when there's 2, 3, 12 people in the executive who can disagree with the law. A president could at least say, I disagree with this law, but now it's a law and it needs to be put into place. Here's what needs to be done. All right. Laws need to be carried out with vigor, not dissension. And that's why we need a 1-person executive. All right. Another argument. Why don't we give them a council? All right. Why don't we give them a council? But a council with too many arguments can foster arguments, or with too many viewpoints can foster arguments as well. That's why the president chooses his own cabinet. All right. This office doesn't need deliberation. It needs expediency. More than 1 executive would get rid of that. All right. Also, Having one executive and there's one person to hold accountable for abuses of office is a whole lot easier to hold people accountable for abuses of office. All right. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When one executive, we have someone to blame for corruption if absolute power does corrupt absolutely. All right. If we only have one person abusing that power, that's the person to blame. If there are 2, 3, 4 executives and there's corruption in the office, they're all going to be blaming each other. And who are we going to accuse of corruption? All right. They'll all blame each other for the wrongdoing. This office needs accountability, and that is much better suited with just one. It's much easier to hold one person accountable if you're only watching one person. We have a free press for a reason. We have to keep our leaders accountable. It's a lot easier to keep one person accountable than it is to keep 3, 6, 12 people accountable. All right. All the way down to the bottom of page 10. If you want a quick, easy summation of his article, this bottom paragraph on page 10 sums it up pretty well. If you want to highlight that, that's got pretty much the meat of his argument. Okay. He goes on to say that the king in England is sort of their executive, and if England has a board of advisors who advise the king, then there's still plurality even in England. And Hamilton goes on to say that, guess what? This isn't England. We actually fought a war to make sure that we were not part of England. So we're doing things differently here now. The American Republic, every government official is voted in and it's indirectly represented by the American people. We don't need a Republican council in the American system of government. The only reason they have a Council of the Republic in England is so that the office of the king can be held accountable to the people. The president's already accountable to the people. All right, the president's voted in as part of the Republican system of government. Small R Republican, not big R Republican. And so the president's already held accountable for his actions, so we don't need a council to be voted in to hold the executive responsible for his actions. Power is not more safe in the hands of the many. All right. A 2-person executive is not a guarantee of liberty. It's because when power is placed in the hands of small number of men, here we go. When power is placed in the hands of small number of men, combined in a common enterprise by an artful leader, it becomes more liable to abuse and more dangerous when abused than if lodged in the hands of one man. So again, one man is more closely watched, more readily suspected. So you also can't unite with others' interests to attract more supporters. It's one man. He represents himself, and then he represents the American people. All right, he can't say, hey, you and me both kind of represent the same. I represent this area of the population. You represent that area of the population. Let's form an alliance and get all the population to vote for us. That wouldn't happen. Vice presidents did not run with the president at this point in time, so that's why that could not happen. Lastly here, he says that it's easier to overthrow or to go against one person if they are evil than it would be to go against 6 to 12 people. All right. He says, here we go, who is himself responsible for what he does. Often the instruments and accomplices of his bad are almost always a cloak to his faults. And then finally he says, paying a bunch of executives is going to be really expensive. In today's day and age, the president gets $400,000 a year. Imagine paying 6 presidents $400,000 a year. That would just get expensive. All right. So one executive, that is why the Constitution is awesome. That is why it needs to be ratified. One executive is the way to go. I went over 10 minutes. Heartily sorry. So next up, we have Federalist 78 in 78 minutes. Just kidding. I'll try and get that one under 10 minutes.